Hey, how's it going? My name is Gene Ree, and I'll be guiding you through this hopefully very short iBT model test summer workshop video. Basically, on this one here, my job is going to be to go through the basic guidelines as well as give a few extra tips maybe regarding how to conduct the class. And so please give me some patience and we'll see how things go. So first of all, if you're teaching this iBT intensive or this iBT workshop model for the first time, basically a few things that might help in how you engage with your students. The students here usually, first of all, one group of students will be taking the test, especially the upper level, level 2, will be taking this class in preparation for the real iBT coming soon. It's administered almost every other weekend, and so basically somewhere during your time, hopefully some of your students will actually take the real one. And then the other group of students are those who are just simply trying to experiment or try to get a test run for Cheongdam, and so it might be their first taste of the Cheongdam experience. So keeping that in mind, that might influence the way that you interact with the students, maybe being a little more direct, at the same time more professional as well as more encouraging. So please keep that in mind. In general, those tend to be the two student groups there. A couple of things just to maybe ease some future minor headaches. When it comes down to student participation or consistent attendance, summertime is their vacation time, and you'll be competing with summer vacations, other seminars, workshops, other academies. Once students take the real iBT, you probably won't see them again, and so basically please don't take any of that personally. As well as within your own building, I'm sure you have supporting staff that will help get rid of any kind of minor annoyances and things like that. However, because summer workshop is taking place in the middle of the regular summer term, there's bound to be some kind of maybe lagging when it comes to things that we take for granted. And so as an encouragement and challenge also to you, please keep in mind to have all your materials ready and prepped. When it means materials, I don't mean like the content, I mean like classroom stuff like board, erasers, markers, in case you use a CD player for the listening, or even the computer's working in order, MP3 players in case your program is instituting those for this summer workshop. So please, again, it'll give the staff a little bit of breathing room as well as make your life a lot easier if you're aware that summer workshop time tends to lead to unforeseen but probable mishaps when it comes to technical stuff. So please keep that in mind, and things should be pretty smooth in other areas. We'll move on first to address the listening and speaking section, and then afterwards we'll address the reading and writing section. First of all, in the listening and speaking section, you'll be addressing what tends to be students' least challenging section, which is the listening section. And then in addition though, speaking is one of the more challenging sections, so it's a combination of the two, of course. When it comes to administering the speaking section, one thing as teachers, especially depending on the resources that we have, you might have to, when you do the speaking test, you might have to give, for example, one half of the class questions 1, 3, and 5, and the other half you give them 2, 4, and 6, which is no problem at all. However, one thing that we don't give you any guidelines on is keeping track of which student did which group of questions in which class. Meaning, in general, students always complain the most about questions 4 and 6 because they deal with so many notes as well as such a limited time in trying to summarize those notes and speaking them out loud. And so because of that, it's very, very, very important that all the students get exposed to all 6 question types. Now, what I did, I made a speaking chart, basically simple like this. I just wrote all the students' names and then basically broke it down into the class numbers, class 1 through 4 or 1 through 8, depending on the section you're teaching. And then basically, I just wrote down, Jenny did 1 through 5. That means next class, I would make the conscious effort to make sure that Jenny did questions 2, 4, and 6 for the next class. That way she's exposed to more and she'll be able to find out which questions she's good at, which one she needs to work on more, things like that. So please keep that in mind. If you don't have the luxury of giving every student their own MP3 players. When it comes down to us teachers as for preparation, when it comes to listening, the general rule of thumb is this. If a student writes down every single note, they should be able to get a perfect score in the listening, ideally. Of course, we know that's not the case, and so because of that, it's our job is going to be to try to help the students take the best notes at the right time, and that deals with different areas. First of all, if they take notes and they can't read those notes, it's pointless. If they write full words, the complete words or phrases or sentences, and they copied it perfectly, but they missed the next idea because they were writing down the previous sentence in its entirety, that's another thing where, again, it's pointless because they got one question right, but they missed the next question. So our job is going to be as proctors, is basically when they're actually taking notes, this is the best time to see how your students are doing. You can see their notes. You can walk around the room. You don't have to like peer over their shoulder and invade their private space, but you'll figure out, okay, 2 of my students are writing too well, meaning they're writing too much. 2 of my students aren't even writing at all for some reason. Now, there's no need to address this publicly, but basically give them consistent reminders as a class to focus on abbreviating, organizing their notes efficiently, as well as listening for verbal cues, which will give them the hint and the time to kind of take down certain notes, because as you'll see when you justify certain questions, you'll tend to realize that the answer itself, of course, is important, but what's actually more important is the sentence or 2 or whatever that preceded that answer choice. They might have asked a question. They might have given a transition phrase. They might have given a verbal cue such as first, second, or third. Those kind of things are actually more important because they force the student to write down the following information, which more often than not tends to be the proper answers to factual questions, purpose questions, inference questions, things like that. So please keep that in mind, that proctoring during their note-taking time, even though it'll be very tempting for us to kind of sit at our computers or sit at the front of the room, that's the best time where we can gauge and just to see what our students need and how we can address those needs and challenge them for the real iBT. So please keep that in mind. Besides that, there's not too much else for the listening section there, but it's one of the things just for your own personal knowledge, as well as specifically for those students who are going to be taking the real iBT. Please mention this to the entire class, but basically there's something called the experimental section, or passages, which will come out on the listening and or the reading passage. What this means is this. For a normal listening passage or test, there's 34 questions divided up between maybe 6 to 7 lectures or conversations. However, for the experimental section, what they do is they'll add 3 or 4 more conversation or lectures. The good news is those questions that follow, the extra 17 questions for a whopping total of 51, those 17 extra questions will not hurt or help their score. Unfortunately, the time to take those notes and to sift through those questions will add mental and physical drain on them during the real test. So if anything, just to give them a warning that if this happens, tell them to get ready for it, that they'll have to do it, and that so that we don't want them to be taken off guard during the real test. Because as teachers, our job is to basically prepare them for the worst and to let them know as much as possible before they actually run into the real thing. That's an extra tidbit you could throw out there. I would recommend during the 2nd or 3rd class, or definitely before any students jump into the real iBT. Okay, so when it comes down to listening and speaking, and one final note, timestamps, which means marking down the actual time in the MP3 where the verbal cues and wrong, as well as, of course, correct answers, where those will be located. Please keep that in mind too, because that'll save much needed and valuable justification time, which you'll have at the very end. So please, that'll make your job a lot easier, as well as become familiar with the MP3 player or the CD player that your building uses. Okay, moving on to the reading section now. For the reading and writing section, when it comes down to administering the writing test, in the program guide, if it hasn't been changed, I believe they still want you to give the integrated essay first. I'm going to make a slight change to that. I actually recommend giving the independent essay first, and the reason is this. During summertime, it's inevitable that students will come in late, and because of that, it won't be a review test, or there shouldn't be a review test. Again, please follow the syllabus and not my words, because I'm very old and my past memories might be jumping in any moment. But in general, students, when they do come in late, the integrated essay, because it's dependent on the reading time, which they can look at again, but the MP3, because we should not play that twice, in order to accommodate for that, the independent essay I would administer first, so that it gives students a chance to be on the same page when it comes to the integrated essay. So please keep that in mind in case you feel the need to address that if your students tend to be habitually late. And as far as the grading on the writing goes, it's okay to be a little stingier or a little more conservative on the grading, because our job here is not to make them feel better about themselves, especially if it's undeserving, but basically we want to encourage them, but in the most tangible and concrete way as possible. And so in doing so, as long as we can write down comments or two or a few regarding what could be strengthened, what could be added, what was mistaken in their writing, and the scores will justify themselves based on that. If we just give them just a plain number without any comments or feedback, again, that's utterly useless to them. And so basically, please keep that in mind. The lower the score, the better, because it'll challenge them, hopefully, as well as it'll give them some kind of things to focus on, as long as they have that tangible feedback from you. So please be specific and clear in your comments, as well as conservative in the scoring. When it comes to actually addressing the reading section of the class, reading, as I mentioned earlier before, is typically the first or second most challenging section out of all four. And the reason is simply because of vocabulary. With the vocabulary time there, even though these students are near the top of their class at their regular Korean schools, or at least very, very, very intelligent, when it comes to English, they might not seem as so. And so our job as teachers is to remember that they are intelligent students. It's their English that might not be as advanced as we would like it to be for such a test that we as the teachers think might be a piece of cake. However, we must be able to put ourselves in the same shoes as our students, and so this will dictate the way that we address them, the way that we question them, the way that we bring up certain terms, things like that, because the more that they feel secure and safe in making mistakes and admitting to their faults or limited knowledge, the better that they'll be able to absorb and learn, because it'll give you something to interact about. And when it comes to the reading section, interaction is going to be key whenever you justify the questions. When justifying questions, always be able to interact with the student one-on-one. And again, you'll need to balance not just interacting with the student who got the question wrong, but also even the questions or the students who got the questions correct. It's very, very important to also bring them into the discussion as well, because you might see that a lot, where if a student only missed 3 questions during the entire test, they basically get almost like a 30-minute mental break if we don't engage them. And so as teachers, it's going to be very, very imperative and useful. And when we're addressing, for example, question number 20, if we're talking about it with Jimmy over here, he's the one who got it wrong, he asked about it, we first of all go through the user justification style. But then in case Mark and Stephanie over here, if they got it correct, it's okay. You don't have to do all the talking. You can ask Jimmy over here to start it off, and then basically you can start get Mark and Stephanie to interact, and they can emphasize what they did learn. Maybe they guessed. Maybe they got it correct because they had to guess between 2 good choices. Now they'll also get to know why choice A was better than choice C, and they'll actually get something out of it as well too. So please keep that in mind when we justify, to interact as much as possible. And then as far as the actual justification strategy or structure, again, There really isn't anything official per se, but one thing or a few things that should always be brought up for every question are question type, as well as important or clue words in the question stem. Now, usually I ask the students for these, Jimmy, what kind of question type is it? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, Jimmy, what are some important words that you would scan for, in the actual story there? Now, feel free to spread that around the room, because you could ask, even though Jimmy asked for the question, you could ask Kevin for the question type. You could ask Eugene for the keywords, things like that. So as long as someone says it, that's the most important thing. Now, this doesn't have to be rote repetition again and again and again. Sometimes I feel free to give the question type and I ask the keywords for the questions. Sometimes it's backwards. I give them the question type, or they give me the question type, and then I'll give them the keywords. Either way, as long as they're always focused on question type and keywords, that's going to be the main thing, because that will dictate how and where they should look for their answers. So please keep that in mind when it comes to justifying. Typically though, we'll always need to justify, of course, two things. The correct answer. However, before that, I would actually justify or prove why their chosen answer choice was incorrect. Many times it's because of vocabulary. Many times maybe they made a simple mistake. Sometimes because they didn't understand the English structure of the sentence, and so they actually got the opposite meaning instead of the intended meaning. All those things you'll need to get out of the students by comfortably and respectfully questioning them. So please keep that in mind as well, or else the way that you feel while you're watching this video, where I'm just simply lecturing to you, they're going to feel the same way. And trust me, during summer term, where it's hot outside and it's early in the morning, it's not really going to make the class any better, which I definitely want it to be as interactive and engaging as possible, not just for you, but also for the students as well. So please keep that in mind. And lastly, when it comes to justifying, when it comes to preparing, that's going to be the bulk of our work. Justifying, finding out why each answer is correct and why the answers are incorrect. I recommend identifying the paragraphs by numbers and each respective line with a number, so it'll be very easy to refer to. As well as, the less you have to look at the actual handout, the better. And so that only comes with continuous absorption and reviewing of the material yourself. So please keep that in mind as well, that we want to portray as professional as image as possible, and we want to be able to engage more instead of simply reading off of our notes like this. And so please, that's something that's you'll need to kind of work on as you're preparing for the classes. But I guarantee after the first few that you've done this, it'll become almost like breathing, where you'll just do this second nature, and so that won't be too much of a stress and too much of a time hassle near the second half of the term as well. So besides that, when it comes down to listening, speaking, reading, and writing, those are pretty much going to be the main tips that I could give you outside the program guide, program manual. I hope these will actually come into play in the room. If it doesn't, great, your job's that much easier. If it does, feel free that, remember, all of us have our own unique personalities, and we do have certain things that we need to address in class, but how we actually do it with the actual students, that's what makes the class different, and that's what makes the class fun. And so feel free to always be encouraging and always be prepared, because that way the students can get something out of it and might actually have a decent time for those 4 weeks while you guys are together during these hot, lazy summer months. So yeah, wish you the best, and yeah, take care in everything you do.